I think we all feel more connected to things that we actually do. Movements that we physically go through, weights that we feel, the texture of fabric or armor, all of these things that connect us over the past. And you might think of hema. I mean, the second letter in there is European. And here we are in North America. And, I met some Germans who reenact the American Civil War in Europe, and it strikes me as kind of odd. And they pointed out to me that it's a little odd that we have Renaissance festivals. But today, hopefully, I will orient you to some of the connections between Europe and the colonial and Revolutionary War history of South Carolina. Also, as people who, you're going to get history questions just from doing this activity at all. Over the next few years, the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. You know, it's big news. The grant money has been flowing. The only grant money out there right now. And there are a lot of American Revolution events. I thought it might be nice to see a little bit about edged weapon fighting in context of that as well. But we'll start a little earlier. And it's always the question in history, where do you start? Do you start at Pearl Harbor? Do you start at the invasion of Poland? Do you start when the Japanese invaded China? Do you start when the bad blood between the Japanese and the Chinese extended back, etc.? There's always an earlier point to kick off from. But with a couple of notes about the English Civil War, and those come a little later, I chose for a starting point the restoration of the English monarchy in 1660. Now, it's been a while since classes, I expect. But there's a period of about 10 years in British history when they don't have a king reigning. The king who is to inherit is in exile. Oliver Cromwell and the Puritans are running things. As usual, the picture in our heads of that period is kind of a cartoon. We're not going to try to fix that today. But the restoration of the monarchy is a good kickoff point because a lot of people also regard that as when, if you were going to pick a date for rapier begins to be replaced or is largely replaced by small sword. That's about the time period. So I'm sorry to say I haven't found any rapier teachers in South Carolina that are authentic time period. And you all might be doing the first two-handed sword teaching that's been done in the state. I'd love to be contradicted on that, but we're not going to find it in the colonial period of our history. What we are going to find, that restoration of the monarchy, only 3 years later, Lords Proprietors are chosen for this colony, named in honor of one of the Charleses. Charles II said it was him, but it was already Carolina under his daddy. And Charleston is founded in 1680. The two traditions that kind of weave together of sword fighting in South Carolina. Small sword, the weapon of the gentleman. It is a sidearm that is carried routinely in Charleston, at least. And there's a lot of opportunity in colonial South Carolina, and for some people, something of an obligation to learn to use the small sword. Then there are the military swords. And the military swords all sort of get lumped together under the term broadsword. Now, sword taxonomy is something that has probably confused and annoyed everyone in this room at some point because it's been rebooted over and over across history, and you'll see people using relatively contradictory terms.
Isn't broadsword the thing that Conan used?
That's right.
That's a broadsword.
Two people are responsible for the most annoying phrases out there. One of them is Robert E. Howard, the genius who wrote all the great adolescent male fantasy fulfillment stories that we tend to love. And just made up words for swords, didn't care. I wish he had at least read a 19th century taxonomy and used it. And the other guy, the other great hero of our culture is Gary Gygax. Because we all know that, well, some of us from a certain generation knows that a broadsword or a longsword each do 1d8 damage against a man-sized creature, but the broadsword is slightly better against giant creatures. These arbitrary terms. Okay, to move back historically to most of the history of South Carolina, if it's pointy and pokey, it's the small sword. And if it is literally anything else, if it is broad enough to deliver a cut, it fell under the broadsword umbrella. And that's how, when the manual of broadsword training is being used out there, it's being used for cutlasses, it's being used for sabers. It was surely used for the heavy dragoon swords that Wade Hampton bought for his guys. It was contemporaneous with the term backsword. That was still being used in the colonial period. And we're talking about a slightly curved, single-edged blade, fairly cheap to produce, was a backsword. But basically, the two traditions are the military one, with a blade that can cut and is usually used in a cutting fashion by the half-trained folks, and the small sword.
Joe, I have a logistical request.
Yes.
Would you mind moving over to here? Because behind you is that Strogan light, and it is extremely...
I haven't fooled anybody into thinking that's some kind of a mystical effect. Museum people with special powers. So,
Thank you.
in front of us, and this is thanks to Rick, you can see the small sword in the middle.
I'll be Vanna.
There you go. And you'll notice if you're used to fighting rapier, this thing's pretty short.
This is a 30-inch blade, which is historically accurate.
The switch from rapier to small sword, to me, it sort of feels like every concealed carry guy in South Carolina carrying, some caliber that starts with 4, all tomorrow because the fashion start carrying 22. That might not be quite fair, and I'm not volunteering to be run through with a small sword or shot with a 22. But
why not?
the rapier was particularly lethal, as most of you were aware, and the small sword was handy, light, easy to carry around, and
You could wear it sitting down.
you could wear it sitting down. Absolutely.
It doesn't knock into things.
Oh, I have a caffeine delivery.
It was able to be worn hanging straight down instead of on a frog. Yeah. Most rapiers were of sufficient length that you couldn't wear them here or they bust into the ground. So you had a frog on your either your sash or your belt that held it in an angle like that. And you bump it out.
So, no, straight ahead. Two early traditions that deserve mention. The Spanish and the French were in South Carolina before the founding of Charleston. The Spanish claimed all the way up to Jamestown. That was all part of La Florida. And so Spanish rapiers and swords used according to the Spanish system certainly crossed this state. And they came back into this state 3 years after Charleston, Charlestown, Charles, the King of England, is founded. Stuartstown is founded, not a reference to the Stuart dynasty, But to a local landowner, Stewart's
Hope you guys
Town,
enjoyed.
out by
You got to be here for the full experience, though. Catch us at the next block.